Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Good afternoon and welcome to the third one of these Sunday afternoon talks during this Vasa period, the rains retreat period. The theme for the talk today is Who Am I? Which I probably don't need to say. It's not just about who this person is, but who all of us are, and that kind of inquiry that has been made by human beings, individuals over many, many thousands of years. As we start to grow up from our childhood into adolescence and going into adulthood and develop ourselves, discover ourselves as individuals, then this is often a kind of question that we ask ourselves: what's our real identity? Who are we? Because we, as we grow up, we begin to experience different perceptions of ourselves, the ways that other people see us, the varieties of different situations we find ourselves in, and so it's very natural to inquire, to explore. Well, what's the real me? What's the person here that's important? What's the real thing? And when reflecting on this question, I was recollecting a talk I gave many years ago that was exactly on this kind of theme, and I was thinking about it, remembering it, and the example I gave was from my own childhood, where I grew up in Kent, in the countryside, and as I was growing up through my teens, and when I was then leaving home and going off to college in London University, I began to realise that I lived in about 5 different worlds, and I was seen as 5 different people. And each of these worlds were kind of distinct from each other. And so this sort of question of, well, who am I? What's the real me in all of this? So as I said, I grew up in the countryside. My parents were very average middle-class English country people. They were farmers. And the kind of environment I grew up in was with lots of dogs and horses. And so growing up in the countryside, then I went to lots of gymkhanas and horse shows, and grew up amongst that sort of horse riding set, and the people who were into hunting, shooting, fishing. In the winter season there would be fox hunting and such like. And so as a child, and growing up and going to these different competitions with ponies and horses, then I was very much identified with that world. So I was within that world. I was seen as one of that crowd, the horse riding, fox hunting crowd. I think maybe some kind of karmic relationship I had with non-violence is that every fox hunt I ever went on, they never caught a fox. So I was a member of the Ashford Valley Hunt, and they never caught a fox when I was out with the hunt. So I'm sure the foxes are grateful. So there was that kind of hunting, shooting, fishing world, and then every summer I would either be part of or help out at the Pony Club's summer camp, and be part of all of that. And that was one of the worlds I lived in. Then there was my family, and my parents and grandparents, and my role as the youngest child of 3 children, 2 sisters, and the family stories and family history, and so that there was the family world. Then there was the school, the people I went to school with. It was a local boarding school. I was a day pupil, but then the people that I grew up with and were my school friends, they were a separate crowd altogether. So there's very little overlap between them and the fox hunting crowd. So there's a sort of hard drinking, partying, public school rowdies that I spent a lot of my youth with. That's where my accent comes from. From Sutton Valence School in Kent. And so that was a third world. And then living in London, I was at London University. I was a student studying psychology and physiology at Bedford College, London University. At that time it was in Regent's Park in the middle of London. So there was my role as a student, not a very diligent student, but still, that was how I was seen as someone in the physiology department, psychology department, someone studying for a degree and involved in that world of academic papers and writing essays and doing experiments and all of that. And then there was the people that I tended to hang out with in London, who were this sort of hippie, anarchist, countercultural crowd. This was the mid-70s, so there was this... and my college was in Regent's Park, and there was this huge squat, what was called Cornwall Terrace, one of the Robert Adam terraces. A few of you probably might have even been there. We meet again. But Cornwall Terrace was an extremely posh building that was occupied by a large number of wild and woolly hippies and anarchists and freewheeling types. And so I knew a lot of people at Cornwall Terrace and spent a lot of time with them, and was in that kind of free festival hippie anarchist crowd, people like Sid Rawle and Ubi Dwyer and such characters who were around in that era. So I began to wonder, which one's the real me? Am I the fox hunting type, or the hippie anarchist, or the academic, or the kind of hard drinking public school old boy and such like? So it was a puzzle, and so one of the things that I really relish about the years I had at university was that it gave me 3 years. Even though I suppose I should have been focusing on my academic studies, more it was just gave me 3 years to look at that and to explore what really is important to me. And the outcome of that was the only thing that was really important to me was spirituality. So that's why as soon as I finished my degree, pretty much I took off for Asia and then ended up in a monastery. So, but anyway, this is just my particular snapshot of the lives that I was having at that time, but that really seeded that question, and I could see then, and I can see now, how many of us get granted particular identities given by our family, saying, you're going to be a doctor. Like, oh really? Oh, okay. Or you're a woman, you're a man, you're British, you're Sri Lankan, you're Thai, you're American, you're Portuguese. You get labelled by your nationality, by your gender, by your disposition, by your parents' expectations. The forces of society and life kind of steer us into these different identities, and that question of, well, who am I, and what's really important, what's meaningful, just gets shoved into the background because I've got exams to pass. I've got expectations of people to meet, and I've got my own ambition to fulfill. When we consider these issues of self, then this is not just an area that's dealt with by religious teachings, but also within the psychological realm and philosophical realm as well. So you can break down or look at the different kind of selves that we conjure up or that we live with, along with the particular career paths and such like. All of us experience a variety of different things that we are, say, referring to when we use the word I. So there's the bodily self. There's this person, this form that has a certain configuration, a height, a weight, an age, and so on. So there's the bodily self. when we say, who am I? Well, I'm this, this body. This is what I am. And then there's the self that is the center of perceptions. That I am looking at you. I'm sitting here with my back to the east. I'm facing to the west. I'm looking out here in the sala at Amaravati on a Sunday afternoon. So there's the myself who is sitting here and is looking in that direction. So there's the self, the feeling of I that's built up out of the perceptions that we are experiencing and the perspective that we have. It may be if you're partially sighted or you're blind or you're hard of hearing or deaf, then you're experiencing a different configuration. If English is not your first language, then maybe there's a few of the words I'm using that you're struggling with and can't quite catch, and so on. Or just the very fact that you're looking this direction at one person and I'm looking in that direction at 100 people. So there's what you can call the perspectival self, like the I that is generated from the field of perceptions that are experienced. Then there's the I that makes choices. You can say the intentional or the volitional self, the me that seems to be choosing which words to say, choosing to come along to a Sunday talk. Or there seems to be this me that makes decisions, who made the decision to follow your parents' expectations, or to go to this school or rather that school, or to wear this shirt rather than that shirt today. So there's the me who makes choices. You can say the intentional self. Then there's what you can call the self that we create through our narrative, my story. I was born in Kent, 1956. And this is my story. So each of us has a narrative, a history that we tell. When someone says, "Well, who are you?" You say, "Well, I was born in Kent, or I was born in Surrey, or I was born in France, or in Sri Lanka, Thailand." That's who I am. This is my story, and we put together that kind of composite, so that the narrative me. And then there is who we are in society. People say, "Oh, you're the Ajahn, or you're the doctor, or you're the Anagarika, you're the guest nun. You are you're one of the regulars to the Sunday afternoon talks. That's who you are. I see you all the time." So we exist in society in a particular role. So I am abbot of. So my social self, if you like, in this place is I am abbot of Amaravati. With my family, my social self is I'm the baby brother. I'm not the abbot. I'm to my sisters, I'm not their abbot. I'm not their Dhamma teacher. I'm their little brother. I'm not complaining. That's just how in society. So each of us participates in these different kind of selves. So when you say, "Well, who are you?" You say, "Well, I'm a doctor," or I'm a Sri Lankan. I'm British. I'm comfortable. I'm uncomfortable. I'm sitting here. I am 60 years old. All of these apply at different times, right? So this is the kind of different selves that we occupy, or we kind of take part in at any one particular time. Now it's kind of interesting along the way that the Latin word for a mask is persona. We use the word person in English, comes from the Latin persona. And the word per means through, and sona is sound. So persona is that which the sound goes through. So a persona is a mask. Like an actor on the Greek or the Roman stage would wear a mask. That's a persona. So right there in the word for one of these things, it's a mask. It's a presentation. So do you present your... how do you present yourself? As a woman, as a man, as old, as young, as a Buddhist practitioner, as a doctor, as a student? What's your mask? Who are you? And so that right there in the very word that we use in English, there's a clue that this is an appearing, a seeming. It's a mask. So then the question is, well, if the person is the mask, what's behind the mask? So we'll get to that. So it's very interesting. I came across a few years ago that we might think that that Buddhist teachings have a kind of monopoly on insight into selflessness, but there was a comment written by the Scottish philosopher David Hume in his treatise on human nature that he wrote in the 1730s, where he said, "There are some philosophers who imagine we are every moment intimately conscious of what we call ourself. For my part, when I enter most intimately into what I call myself, I always stumble upon some particular perception or other, of heat or cold, light or shade, love or hatred, pain or pleasure. I never can catch myself at any time without a perception, and never can observe anything but the perception. When my perceptions are removed for any time, as by sound sleep, so long am I insensible of myself, and may truly be said not to exist. I may venture to affirm of the rest of mankind that they are nothing but a bundle or a collection of different perceptions which succeed each other with an inconceivable rapidity and are in a perpetual flux and movement." So there are some theories that David Hume actually came across Buddhist teachings when he was in France. When he was writing that book, there was also a Jesuit college in that little town of La Flèche, in the College of La Flèche in France. So there's some theories that he got some Buddhist teachings from a couple of Jesuits. One had been in Siam and another who'd been in Tibet. But I think also that it's not just David Hume, or not just within the Buddhist field, but this is something that's been observed also by the Greek philosophers also, like Pyrrho in particular, who, in the same way, when they look for this mysterious self, who is the experiencer, the doer, the owner of the body, that no particular thing can be found. When we look for the self, the doer, the owner, the experiencer, when that I, that mysterious self, is searched for, no particular thing can be found. So I wouldn't say that the Buddha was the only one who came across that, but certainly within other fields of study and thinking and exploration, human beings around the world have had the same kind of discovery. But maybe I would, even though obviously I'm a little bit biased, being a Buddhist monk, I would say that within the Buddhist tradition we have the most clearly articulated way of exploring this kind of question. And particularly the Buddha's teachings on the three characteristics of existence, on impermanence or uncertainty, anicca, unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and not self, anatta. These teachings as being the universal characteristics of all experienced reality, I would say is a most comprehensive teaching, and also the practice of insight meditation, vipassana, as a way of exploring this feeling of I and me and mine, the feeling of being, the feeling of self and identity. It's the most clearly and fully articulated way of exploring that. Again, I admit I'm thoroughly biased, but I don't really know of any other spiritual method or psychological method around the world that looks so directly and so fully and in such a comprehensive way at this experience. So when we talk about insight meditation or vipassana, then it's geared towards looking at the very nature of experience itself. Last week I was talking about how the mind creates its own version of the world. So vipassana meditation is to do with the means whereby that world can be explored and can be seen in a most complete and unbiased way, to see its nature, what that world is. And in particular, to explore this feeling of I, who is the experiencer of the world, or the one who's acting in the world, or the one who's the apparent person who's in the middle of the world, or is the knower of the world. When we practice insight meditation, probably most of you are somewhat familiar with that, but the basic methodology is to use some means of calming the mind, to focus the attention on the present using something like the mindfulness of breathing, or using a mantra meditation or some way of establishing the mind into a degree of tranquility, and a degree of tranquility sufficient just to be able to keep the attention on the present moment. So with the mind being able to focus on the present, then the flow of experience can be witnessed. So say, for example, you establish concentration by focusing on the breath. That helps the attention to be keyed into the present. Once the mind is calmed and focused and steady enough, the attention is grounded in the present reality, then rather than focusing on a particular object, like the breath or a mantra or another feeling or a sound, then the attention is deliberately broadened to include all the flow of experience. So with what we call insight meditation, vipassana, there's a deliberate opening of the field of attention. So rather than focusing on a single object, the whole content of the present becomes the meditation object. So whether the ears are receiving a sound, or there's a sensation in the body, or a memory arises, or a plan for the future, or a wave of excitement or irritation, different emotions arise, then vipassana meditation is the process of recognizing, irritation arising and passing away, sound arising and passing away, feeling arising and passing away, remembering arising and passing away, planning arising and passing away. The mind stays in the position of observation and reflection, and is receiving and knowing and letting go of all of the content of experience, to be fully aware of the process of experience. So letting go of the content to know the process. So rather than, say, paying attention to the content of my what I'm saying now, my words, just in a sense broadening the attention to recognize, sound is changing, hearing is changing, perceptions are changing. So you're deliberately taking the attention off the content, the meaning or the value, even whether it's inside or outside, whether it's pleasant or painful, sacred or profane or neutral. Rather, is it changing? Is it unsatisfactory? Can it be permanently pleasing? And in particular, with respect to the theme for today, is it mine? Is it something that belongs to me? And what, if it does, what's this me that is the apparent owner? So that the process of insight meditation is built around, if you like, deconstructing that sense of I'm sitting here paying attention to my body, or I'm sitting here meditating, I'm sitting here listening to the sounds of the birds outside, or I'm paying attention to the feelings in my legs. And it takes that initial experience and then deconstructs it. Rather than I am feeling this, I am doing this, I'm experiencing this, it deconstructs that. It's an insight, it's a seeing into the way that experience is formed, so that sense of I'm here, the world is out there, I am meditating, I am hearing, I'm feeling, I'm thinking, I'm remembering, I'm planning, I'm wishing my thinking would stop. Whatever it might be, that it's deconstructing the habitual judgment of self to look more deeply and completely into what this is, what this present experience is formed of, and what its reality can truly said to be. So say, for example, when we're sitting in meditation and you hear the sound of a bird, or here we're very blessed to be close to Luton Airport, so we have regular planes flying over, going this way, going that way. So you often have the sound of planes passing by. If you're on a meditation retreat with 55 other people, then there's plenty of people coughing, shuffling, clearing their throats. So there's a hearing a sound. So when you hear a bird, pigeons crowing in the morning, or a plane going overhead, most of us don't have a sense of ownership of the sound. We don't say that's my sound, or I own that pigeon's sound. If you do, you've probably got some deep psychological problems. But we wouldn't claim ownership of it. We might say, I hear it, I'm the one hearing the sound of the plane or the bird, or I'm the one hearing that person cough, but we wouldn't feel a sense of ownership of that object. So usually the easiest things to see as not self and not being who and what we are is a perception, like seeing something. I don't think that red of the back wall of the sala is mine, or the blue of the carpet. I don't think of myself as the owner of that. I don't have a personal relationship with blue or red and so forth. So perceptions are the easiest thing, I would say. People's experience varies, so these are generalizations, but generally it's easiest to see that this is not mine, or not who and what I am. So then a little bit more challenging is feelings, like sensations in the body, so that you might be able to not identify with the sound of a plane, or that when you explain, well, that even that feeling of me hearing, that's not really a me, that's just, there's hearing, that's all. And that's fairly easy to let go of and to not identify with. That pain in the leg, it's like, ow, that really feels like my knee. Ow. And so that's more personal, it's more immediate. But again, when that's explored, there's a feeling of my pain, my knee, oh dear, what's happening there? But when that's in the same way explored and examined, well, how is that pain mine? And if it is mine, what's the me that is the owner? Like David Hume, sort of looking for who's the experiencer. You can't find the self who is the one who owns the perceptions. Yeah, okay, I can say that's I'm feeling pain, or that's my knee that's hurting. What's the referent? What's the me that is the owner? What does that look like? Does that have a shape, a location? What a size, a weight? What is it? Yeah. And no defined form or quality can really be found other than the knowing. So then sensation's a little bit easier to let go of than the next layer in, which is thoughts, and that trusty narrative self, the me, my meditation, my life, my debts, my hopes, my achievements, my problems, the stories that the mind tells, so that even if with insight we can let go of the sensations and to see those as being not who and what we are and not having an owner, then those thoughts, those memories and all the things I've done well, all the things I've done badly, the things I should be doing, my views and opinions about the people that I live with, my family, and then all of that seems a lot more personal. Memories of things that only we remember, no one else knows about. That thing that I did back when I was 4 years old, no one else knows. It's a huge secret. I was the only one who understood who burnt down the barn. I didn't, that I'm aware of. But so something that we think only we know about, no one else knows about, that's incredibly personal, that really seems to have this I and mine quality. That again, there's a memory that arises. It takes shape, does its thing, passes away. It's got this name written on it, but what is that name referring to? When I say I remember, or I did, or that was me who did that, who felt that, who achieved that. Then it takes a little bit more to deconstruct those stories. But again, with insight, then the more that they're explored and examined and investigated, then even those stories and those narratives of our life and our all the rights and wrongs and injustices and achievements and so forth, identities that come from our stories, they too can be seen as being empty of self and what belongs to a self. So then a little bit further in, beyond the thoughts and those stories, then kind of connected to them, but even more deep, are the emotions that are associated with it. So not just sensations of pleasure or pain in the body, but the emotions of, say, that you're heartbroken, you have unrequited loves, or you have resentments of how you've been done wrong by the government or by your ex-partner or by your current partner, your Ajahn. And those strong emotions, feelings of jealousy, feelings of infatuation, feelings of irritation, feelings of resentment, feelings of excitement, so that even, I would say, for most people, even more deep than the thinking, the emotions seem to be really real and substantial. No, I know I should love that person, but I hate him. I can't, and I can't stand that person. I can't get rid of that feeling. I see that person and I just hate them. So, or I don't love them, or whatever it might be. So that but in exactly the same way, along with conceptual thought and there's narratives, emotions and seemingly strong and deep emotions can still seem to be real and substantial until they're opened up and explored. So like the layers of the onion, you're kind of going deeper and deeper into this onion of identity, and but each layer in, where it seems to be more substantial, more essential, more real, as the mind explores and examines and questions, then each layer is revealed to be, well, no, there isn't really anything there. There's no person there. There's no substantial, real I. And then maybe the most difficult thing or most convincing aspect of identity is the choice maker. That which is say, I decided to come to the Sunday afternoon talk. I decided to pick this title. I'm choosing to get up and leave the room. I'm choosing to speak to this person or not speak to that person. It really feels like there's a me who's making decisions. And then, if you have been studying Buddhist teachings, Buddhist philosophy, that but surely, Ajahn, we're the owners of our karma, we're the heirs to our karma, born of our karma, related to our karma. That karma is the choices, it's the intentions. Karma is real, right? And so that can seem like the most sort of gritty and gnarly and substantial basic quality of identity is that the choice maker. This me that is deciding and following different impulses towards kindness and generosity, or towards selfishness and so on. But again, in exactly the same way, and you don't have to believe me, but hopefully with meditation and exploration you can see this for yourself. When you open it up, there even with an intention and a choice, when you deconstruct it a little bit, there's still no person there. The mind is presented with a variety of possibilities. There's this, and this. So what looks most interesting? So there's the perception of the possibilities. Then there's the memory. Okay, what had a pleasant result in the past? What had a painful result in the past? So the perception of the possibilities is not self. Memory, remembering past successes, failures, pleasure and pain, is not self. Then the recognition, okay, well that worked well last time, that memory seems to match this possibility, so maybe that's the best way forward. So that perception, that thinking, that kind of calculation is also not self. It doesn't really have an owner. And then that the choice to say, well, let's try that one and see what happens. That's also a thought, and then the action following it, choosing to walk that way or speaking those words, those actions of moving or those words that arise, those similarly are not who and what we are. They're not self. They don't have an owner. And once again, I'm making these kind of broad statements, but and they are open for discussion. But I would suggest that when you take even a decision-making process apart, you really can't find anybody there that's doing the choosing. So yes, there are the laws of karma, this action brings this result, but when you look for the individual entity who's the owner of the karma, it's really difficult to find what that is, or to fix that as a separate individual entity. Now the Buddha was a pragmatist, not an idealist, which means to say he taught in a very pragmatic way. So he didn't say the true self is this. Your true self is the absolute reality. Or he didn't use kind of highfalutin philosophical, metaphysical language to talk about a true self or a real self or the real me, because he realized to some extent whatever you and he said these words: whatever you conceive it to be, the truth is always other than that. Yena hi manyanti tatatang hoti anyatati. Whatever you conceive it to be, the fact is always other than that. So, whatever you think you are, that thought can't be it. So he realized that from very early on. So his whole method was to teach us how to stop identifying with what we're not, and then what is real becomes apparent on its own. then the thinking mind can jump in and say, that's what I am. I'm undifferentiated awareness, that's what I am. But that's just a thought. That's just a collection of words and concepts. That thought of, I am this or that thought is not what we are, that's just a thought. So the Buddha's method was to try and help us to establish that mind which abides in that quality of liberated awareness, rather than creating a concept which is something that the mind grabs onto and tries to get born into. Now, one of the most helpful methods of exploring this and developing this kind of insight, many years ago, back in 1981, if I remember correctly, it's a long time ago now, getting over 35 years ago, nearly 40 years ago. So during one of the first winter retreats that we had at Chithurst, this was before any of the branch monasteries were opened up by Ajahn Amaro in this country. So this was the winter of 1981. So we had a community retreat at Chithurst, and the house was still a bit of a wreck. So we only had what's now the reception room there. The shrine room in the house still had a huge hole in the floor. And there was holes in the roof, and much of the building was uninhabitable. But we did have the shrine room, what's now the reception room. So we were all gathered in there for our winter retreat. And the winter retreat was only 2 weeks long, or 3 weeks long. But during this time, then there was a couple of meditation methods that Luang Por Sumedho taught that were incredibly helpful. And he taught a particular method of inquiry that he had used himself before he became a monk in Thailand. And first of all, he began teaching the meditation on what's called the sound of silence, or the inner sound, the nada in Sanskrit, which is listening to the sort of background tone that appears in our hearing. Most people, if you listen closely, there's a kind of high-pitched, subtle tone that's in the background of hearing almost all the time. Some people have tinnitus and say, yeah, it's not in the background now, John, I can't get him to shut up. I've spent thousands of pounds trying to get rid of it. So for most people it's in the background, some people it's very much in the foreground. But it's a faculty of the experiential world and the hearing that can be used as a meditation object. So Luang Por Sumedho had used this a lot himself as a focal point for meditation. And so the English winters, particularly in the countryside, are very, very quiet. So he'd begun to teach this meditation on the inner sound as an alternative to mindfulness of breathing, so that there was a lot of sort of quietness and a lot of focus, even though it was about 25 or 30 people squished into a very small room. So that teaching of the meditation on the inner sound was a very helpful sort of preparation. And then he brought into the picture the use of inquiry and asking this very question, who am I? So he would encourage us to focus on the inner sound, to concentrate on that as much as possible. And when the mind was really quiet and there was just the hearing of the nada, then to drop into that internal space, the psychological space, the question, who am I? To put aside all other thought and question and just to ask very sincerely and very directly, who am I? Now this was a method, as I said, that he had used before he went to Ajahn Chah's monastery, and he'd learnt it when he was in the American Peace Corps. He lived in Borneo, in a little town called Semporna. He taught Chinese. He was a Chinese speaker. Luang Por Sumedho studied Chinese at university and taught in a Chinese school in Borneo. And he was very interested in Buddhism, and particularly in Zen Buddhism. And he had a friend who sent him these books that were written by Charles Luke, who was one of the early Buddhist scholars. And there was a series called Chan and Zen Training that had been written and translated by Charles Luke. And in one of them there was the Dhamma Talks from a meditation retreat led by great master Shu Yun. And it was a retreat that he had led at the age of 114 in Shanghai. And in these talks, and he describes this method of meditation on the question, who am I? And exactly with this method, you bring the mind to as deep a quality of quietness as possible, and then the mind poses the question, who am I? Now the point of the question is not to come up with some kind of clever philosophical answer, and your own name is definitely not the answer. That's not what it's about. But rather, it's called the Chinese speakers here hopefully will forgive my bad pronunciation, but it's called a huatou. Is that right? Yeah? Close enough? Well, so it means that the head and the tail. And so that the question is the head, and then the silence that follows the question. The sort of the pause, the gap in the mind before the thinking sort of wades in and says, I'm awareness, that's what I am, or I'm the one who knows, or I'm Samedo, or he would have been Robert then, but before the thinking mind jumps in, that becomes the object of attention. So that the question is the head, and then the tail is really the important bit. So that he used this and found it incredibly helpful as a meditation. So he would ask that question, who am I? And then focus on that gap. Because when the mind is not busy, it's very quiet and focused, then when you drop that into the space of the mind, what it recognizes is who's the wrong question. This isn't a who, it's more of a what. And so in a sense it trips up the thinking mind, it trips up the self-creating mind, the ahankara, the I-making, mamankara, the mind-making habit. It kind of falls over its own feet, because at that moment the intuition says, who? Who doesn't really apply. And so before any thought takes shape, there's this kind of space, this gap, as Luang Por Sumedho would call it. And he'd say, that's the thing to aim the attention on, is that gap. Before the thinking mind and the self-creating mind wades in and starts creating some idea of a me, in that moment the mind is awake, there's no sense of self, there's a quality of simplicity and limitlessness. That's the answer, as it were. And so then, and you can develop this. So I found that incredibly helpful teaching and a very, very powerful practice to do, because, as I said, when you ask the question, who am I, after asking it a couple of times, who becomes ridiculous. So then you can, and also it's not that you can only ask who am I, but you can tweak the question or the statement. So then so instead of asking who am I, then I'd say, what am I? What am I? Because what seemed to be more realistic than who. But then the I started to feel really weird, like, well, the I doesn't quite seem to match the reality. So then rather than what am I let that develop into what is it? But then even the it started to feel kind of cumbersome and clunky, and like, well, this isn't really an it. So then, as the inquiry would develop, I'd notice that even asking what is it seemed to be out of place or too sort of intrusive, or kind of filling up that space of awareness. So I began to just use what. And even what is too presumptuous about, well, it's saying that there's a thing here, or a thing that's a knower, or a thing that is known. Then what seemed to be too much, until finally there's just this question mark, and then the question mark would disappear, and there's just a point, and then even the point would disappear, and there's just pointlessness. So this talk is about being completely pointless. There's incidentally, as an aside, there's a really wonderful little cartoon with songs by Harry Nilsson called "The Point," which is a very, very beautiful sort of exploration of this similar kind of area for children. About this child who's born. Everyone is born in the land of point, and everybody has a point on their head. And there's one little kid who's born called Oblio, who has no point. And he goes off. He gets thrown out of the village because he hasn't got a point. And then he gets banished to the pointless forest. Anyway, that's a bit of a side issue. But in terms of this area, I really recommend this as a practice, And some people have criticized this as saying, asking who am I, that's ridiculous. The Buddha said all dhammas are not self, so it's a pointless question. That's the point. The point is that you discover it's a wrong question. But not as a theory or as an idea, but you discover it's the wrong question from your own wisdom. Your own wisdom recognizes this isn't really a who. The mind is not a person. Oh, and not just as hearing the words, like you can hear me say the mind is not a person, but it's discovering that kind of from the inside, as it were. So the point of this kind of inquiry is that it's a revealing the presumptions that the mind makes about what we are, and opening that up, and then using that experience of the mind, knowing that gap, knowing that spaciousness, when the question falls away and before an answer forms, and letting that, in a sense, be the baseline of experience. In other spiritual traditions, say, like in Advaita Vedanta, they use the kind of opposite approach where they meditate on the I am, and so when they ask the question, who am I, rather than the sort of Buddhist approach of emptying out the I am, they take a sort of have a different philosophical framework. But I would suggest, and maybe this could be discussed a bit more in the questions and answers and discussion time. I would suggest that the point is exactly the same, or the method is really a little bit different, but the goal is exactly the same. So rather than taking the I am and emptying it out and seeing it as intrinsically void of substance, it kind of expands the I am to include everything. And so but it's also, when you say I am, but taking a concept like I am the universe or I am everything, rather than I am nothing, that both of them are ways of approaching the mind's habit of conceiving and rejigging the way that it is looked at and explored, in order to help your own wisdom faculty, your own heart, to know the reality of what is. Now, in Buddhist philosophy, there are two different layers or two different ways of this letting go of self is talked about. Sort of two different depths of, kind of different distances into the onion, if you like. So the Buddha used a framework of 10 fetters, or what they call the Sangyojana, as the 10 obstacles to enlightenment. So a fetter is like handcuffs or shackles or chains. That's what a fetter means. So the 10 fetters are the 10 chains or handcuffs and things that tie the heart down. So and they represent the different levels of enlightenment. So that the first level of enlightenment, stream entry, involves letting go of the first 3 fetters. And of those 3 fetters, number 1 is self-view, sakkaya ditthi. So when we talk about letting go of self, or the development of insight into not self, the first layer is this the insight into self-view, into sakkaya ditthi. And so again, Luang Por Sumedho would very helpfully describe this as identification with the body. It's the belief, I am the body, I am the personality. I am this person. I'm a woman, I'm a man, I'm old, I'm young, I'm English, I'm French, I'm Thai, I'm Sri Lankan, I'm American. That's what I am. So sakkaya ditthi is that belief that those are true and substantial qualities. To break through sakkaya ditthi is to recognize that can't be the whole story. That's not really what I am. So that in order for stream entry to be realized, that level of attachment, identification has to fall away. But there's a whole extra layer, so a lot deeper into the onion, which is not broken through until arahantship, which is called asmimana. So you have 4 levels of enlightenment: stream entry, once returning, non-returning, and then arahantship, full enlightenment. So the more subtle level of identification is called asmimana. Asmi means I am. It's the Pali for I am. Mana is conceit. So it's called the conceit of identity, or the conceit of I am. And there's a very lovely teaching I reflect on and quote quite often, and it concerns a monk called Venerable Khemaka, and he was very old and reaching the end of his life, And so he's living in this monastery, and his friends said, well, Khemaka, you're getting towards the end of your life. Have you completed your practice? Have you realized arahantship yet? And he's on his deathbed. And so he sends, and there's a whole sort of beginning part of the sutta where he sends a message back saying, yeah, no, I haven't reached the end of the path yet. And they say, well, how have you not reached the end of the path yet? And sends messages back and forth. And finally, he gets so fed up with these friends of his harassing him from a distance, he gets up and goes to go and visit them. Gets off his deathbed. So, these bloody friends of mine won't leave me alone. So anyway, it turns into this dialogue between Venerable Khemaka and his friends. And and he gives this very beautiful analogy. He says, I've been practicing a long time, and there is no identification with any of the 5 khandhas. So with the body, with feelings, perceptions, mental formations, or consciousness, discriminative consciousness. So it's really clear. And so he's saying, definitely self-view, Sakkaya Ditthi, has really been broken through. There's no belief that I'm the body, I'm the personality. But there's still this feeling of I that is around. It's not attached to anything, but it just persists. He says, like with a flower, you can smell the flower, but you can't tell where the fragrance comes from. Does it come from the petals, or from the pollen, or from the stamens, or the sepals, or the stalk? You can't tell, but the fragrance is there. He said in exactly the same way, that this feeling of I is here, but it's not attached to the body, or my thoughts, or my feelings, or emotions, or any of it, but it's still, there's this I feeling. But as he's giving this description about, and so he's describing asmimana. So asmimana is that what they call a conceit of identity that is not attached to any particular thing, any experience, but in and of itself, it's like the core, say, contraction of mind that says I. Even if it's not I am anything, it's just this I-ness, me-ness, or in Pali, ahankara, made of I am, mamankara, made of mindness. And very interestingly, I think it's the only instance where he actually became an arahant hearing his own Dhamma talk. Because he sort of completed his practice as he's giving this explanation to his friends. And so a few of them became arahants as well. So it's, you can get enlightened hearing your own Dhamma talk. So if people complain about you talking to yourself, maybe use that as an excuse. I'm trying to enlighten myself by hearing my own Dhamma talk. So so this is, as I was saying earlier, that whatever you conceive it to be, the truth is always other than that. Yena yena hi manyanti tatatang hoti anyatati. So that's a common phrase that the Buddha uses in the teachings, and it's a simple statement. Whatever you conceive it to be, the truth is always other than that. Which means that the reality of what is, or kind of what we are, is inconceivable. It's not something that can be conceived. Now when we talk about a concept, when the Western world we praise and revere thinking, and we assume that a thought is the ultimate reality. In the Buddhist understanding of things, it's kind of the opposite. And the Buddha says, conceiving, manyati, conceiving is a cancer, it's a disease. It's a problem. it's alien. It's a state of suffering. That conceiving, that saying, I am this. As soon as this is real, this is true. As soon as the mind takes a thing and tries to make it real, or make this I as an individual entity, right there is dukkha. And so some people might feel that it's a kind of nihilistic philosophy, but I would say it's quite the opposite. Rather, the Buddha's teaching this to help us to stop suffering, to not be creating those I ams. And oftentimes when we reflect on anatta, or people talk about anatta, then they think, well, it means I have to believe I don't exist, that I'm not real, and it's confusing because for many people, because it can seem to say that I'm supposed to believe I'm not here, when our experience of this present reality is the most real thing we know. Our, whatever colour or shape or flavour it has, this quality of awareness, this knowing of this present, this is the most real, this is my experience, this is the most real thing there is knowing, is being aware. But, and so it can be frustrating that the Buddha says, well, you can't conceive, as soon as you try to conceive that or put that into a box, or make it into a personal identity, the heart has lost the reality of that awake quality. It's being born into a box, into a pod, into a limitation, into a persona, into a mask. And there's the last thing I'd like to share for this talk is a teaching that I've reflected a lot recently, where the Buddha is kind of talking about his own subjective experience. And it's in a dialogue between the Buddha and Vacchagotta, who was one of his indefatigable inquirers. He was a wanderer. He wasn't originally a disciple of the Buddha. He was a wanderer from a different group. But he kept coming to see the Buddha and ask questions. And off in the future, the whole book about Vacchagotta deserves to be written, but I've got other books on the go already. One day, I'd like to write a whole collection of things about the Buddha and Vacchagotta. But anyway, in this dialogue with Vacchagotta is where the Vacchagotta's been asking the Buddha, what happens to an enlightened being after the death of the body? Where do they go? And the Buddha's already explained that you can't say where do they go. Reappears in another place doesn't apply. Doesn't reappear does not apply. Both reappears and doesn't reappear does not apply. Neither reappears nor does not reappear. None of those apply. And Vacchagotta's like, there's got to be one of those, please, give me a break. And the Buddha said Vaccha. And then so then this is where the Buddha talks about his own subjective experience. I mean, I know it's not quite accurate to say that, but close. What he says is that he's talking about his own experience. He says, Vacchagotta, that that material form, whereby one trying to describe the Tathagata, the Buddha, would describe him, that material form, that feeling, that perception, that mental formations, that consciousness, that one trying to describe the Tathagata would describe him, that has been cut off at the root, made like a palm tree stump, deprived of the conditions of existence, and rendered incapable of arising in the future. The Tathagata is liberated from being reckoned in terms of material form, feeling, perceptions, mental formations, discriminative consciousness. He is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean. So the Tathagata is liberated from being reckoned in terms of material form, the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness. He is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean. So he is, there's an isness, but that isness can't be reckoned in terms of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, three-dimensional space, time, individuality. None of that applies. Like, all of that does not apply. That whole languaging, that framework does not apply. But there's, the Tathagata is. So it kind of takes away our familiar handholds and reference points with one hand, but says, yeah, but here is the Tathagata. And when we talk about the Tathagata, it's not just talking about the Buddha as a spiritual teacher of 2,500 years ago, but it's talking about that knowing mind of yours, that in you which is awake, is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean, but is also cannot be reckoned in terms of form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness. So on that point, I think it's time to pause. Time for a cup of tea, this being England. Have a tea break, and we can come back together again about 20 past for discussion and questions and responses. So this is the time for a Dhamma discussion. So anything that I've talked about, different points I've raised during this set of reflections, and feel free to ask your questions. We have a wandering mic. We would request that people wait till the microphone arrives before asking a question. Then not only can everyone hear the question, but also it'll be recorded so that we'll be able to have reference to that in the future. So please, whatever you'd like to ask, this is the time for that. Don't be shy.
Bhante, if the inquiry is successful, it can be emotionally a very frightening experience, because I am rather used to having this reality and the body and having some ground under the feet. So if there is suddenly a success in this inquiry, and there is actually a panic or emotionally very disturbing reaction to the experience, what would be the advice for dealing with it?
Well, it's a good question. It's this kind of experience, say, as you say, if the inquiry is successful, it's terrifying to the ego, because rather like a president that doesn't want to lose power, or a prime minister, they feel threatened, and they try to protect themselves, and they gather their forces of resistance around them. So the ego is very like a tyrant or a political leader. So it's, that threat of being deposed is really psychologically painful. But to the heart, it's liberating. So it's only the ego that's frightened, I would say. That's where the fear is coming from. And so, in a sense, that fear is a good sign. It means that the ego knows it's in trouble. And it's not to demonize the ego. Egos have a very useful place. We wouldn't have developed them as a living being if they didn't have their place in nature. Our ego serves a very useful social function. So I can look at you and I can say Edmunds. I can look at him and say Venerable Gosito. And you know, I'm talking to you and I'm talking to you. So we can distinguish each other. The ego helps us to function in society. Like Ajahn Amaro would say, if we were all just called person, it would be really difficult. Person, come over here. Who's he talking to? So the ego has its place, but it becomes problematic when it claims to be an absolute reality. So that kind of feeling of threat is, in a way, it's a healthy symptom. Yeah, in a way, it's the ego knowing that it's no longer in charge of anything, or it never really was in charge of anything. And also in Buddhist practice, the quality of the refuges is that's the counterpoint to the insight into not self or into liberation. The refuge means it's a safe place. The refuge means it's something that's secure, it's reliable, it's safe, it's shelter from the storm. That's what a refuge is. Like refugees, they're coming from a dangerous place to a safe place. You're seeking refuge. So that as I think Robert Thurman, the famous Buddhist professor, teacher, said the Buddha just doesn't take away our self and leave us out in the middle of the traffic. Yeah? But I think it's a really good expression. But rather, that familiar set of identities, I am a monk, or I am a teacher, or I am a doctor, or I'm a spiritual seeker, that's what I am. The familiar I ams are taken away, but in the same gesture, the refuges are provided. So the refuge in Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, it's not just, again, it's not, what makes it a refuge, it's not just a nice idea, it's not just an ideal, but Luang Por Chah would frequently make the point that the Buddha that is a refuge is not the Buddha who was born 2,500 years ago. The Buddha that's the real refuge, the safe place, is that quality of awareness of your own heart. That which knows, gee, this is frightening. That which knows fear is not afraid. So taking refuge in the Buddha is taking refuge in that which knows fear, rather than the fear itself. It knows that sense of agitation, or the rewriting of your script. That which knows that agitation or that transformation is not agitated. It's free from that. So when we talk about taking refuge in Buddha, in Dhamma, which means not just the Buddha's teaching, but it means the reality of the way things are. It's a fundamental realism. Attuning your life, your attitudes with how things actually are, rather than how you think they should be or how you thought they were. So that that process of fear. In a way, it's rather like going to the doctor and finding out there is something seriously wrong with you. In a way, it's you don't want to hear it, but in another way, it's good that you heard it. Then you can do something about it. Does that make sense? So it's a good pain. Really, I'm not kidding. It's a useful pain. Like so many years ago, I was diagnosed with melanoma, the skin cancer, it's kind of dangerous skin cancer. That's why you always see me wearing a hat. I'm not supposed to let the sun touch my skin. I went to, because I had this mole that had been getting itchy and going a strange shape on me, and I'd been to 2 doctors in this country, and they said, "Oh, don't worry about it, you're fine." When I moved to the States, then a couple of people associated with Abhayagiri, one of the novices was a nurse, and one of the people on the board of trustees was a doctor. And they both saw it and they said, "You should see a dermatologist." So I went to a local doctor, and dermatologist in the local town of Ukiah. And I think he was used to stray religious types. Mendocino County is a very countercultural place. So I think, like many doctors, he'd seen all kinds of colourful characters coming in with all sorts of exotic diseases that they didn't really have. So he said, all right, yeah, what's the problem? And so I said, well, it's this mole on my shoulder. And he said, okay, let's have a look. And he literally kind of turned around, took one look, picked up his camera, took a shot and said, lie down. Reached for the scalpel. So it's like, okay, one look, there was no interruption in his movement. It was like, okay, lie down. And so I realized, oh, this looks like it might be quite serious. So it turned out to be malignant, but it was just in the first stage. So it's not good to hear that you've got cancer, but it's good to know that it's been found and that you can do something about it. So, I have a colourful scar on my shoulder, but I keep out of the sun and I use sunscreen. But it's horrible to know, but it's good to know in the same breath. So the ego being threatened, it's unpleasant to know it's not in charge, like all our favourite tyrants and political authoritarians. But it's also good to know that they're not absolutely in charge and they don't have absolute power. It's helpful too. Any other questions? There's a hand there. If you could wait for the microphone.
Ajahn, the question I had was, during meditation we work on sort of seeing the ego, and then I found that when the ego is there, the heart is very contracted, but when the ego is let go of, the heart is quite wide and spreads. In what you've said, where does the heart lie in perception, mind and thought? And I was confused.
Well, the heart is aware of it. That's the, if you like, the knowing organ, the faculty of awareness. Like when I use the word, like the heart or awareness, they're kind of synonymous. So awareness is the activity of the citta, the heart. But what you describe is exactly how I would describe it too. When the mind fixates on self-concern, then the heart is sort of limited, contracted, imprisoned. And when those self-centered concerns fall away, there's a sense of limitlessness and contentment, happiness, freedom. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it was a terminology. I wasn't sure what name to put it.
Well, the terms are used in different ways by different teachers in different situations, so it's good to ask, because different people use words in different ways, and so it's good to check things through and to find out what's really being meant. Yes, there's a question.
Is it because when you said, who am I, and it kind of not easy to answer the question. Is it because we can't rely on human beings to be constant in their behavior? Because they can change, so you can't say, yes, you are this, but then tomorrow you could be something else. Apart from the ego and all that.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, it's rather, like I was saying at the beginning, you know, what really has value in your life, or which identity are you referring to? Is it you as a doctor, or you as a child, you as a parent, you know, you as another person in the queue at the supermarket? You know, who are you? You know, we are all these different people. So that the more that you are fixed on, or a person is fixed on, I am this person, and everyone must see me in this way, then that is necessarily going to cause a lot of conflict and difficulty. The more that there can be, in a sense, an adaptability, that, you know, in a sense, a readiness to wear a variety of different masks. Like, if I demanded my sisters call me Ajahn and bow 3 times whenever they see me, that would cause conflict in the family. And I can guarantee they're very fine people, but I'm not their Ajahn. So that, you know, to recognize that the way you like to see yourself, or you habitually see yourself, is not the way other people see you. You know, that they see you as, oh, just another man, or just a woman, or just a, you know, someone who's in the way. Or, you know, how when you're on the M25 and you need to get, like I went to Chithurst and back yesterday, so you know, you're on the M25. So the M25 comes into a lot of Dhamma talks here at Amaravati. It's a very, very useful spiritual symbol. So, you know, when you're trying to get to Heathrow from here, you know, you say, oh, the traffic was awful. You know, they are the traffic. I'm never traffic. They are in my way. I'm trying to get to the airport, but the traffic, them. How many people sit in their car on the M25 or anywhere and say, I am traffic? How unfortunate that I'm clogging up the road for all these important people who've got significant places to get to. How regrettable that I'm in their way. Any hands, show of hands? Amazing, not a single hand being raised, you know, because they are traffic. Like, or that the queues were enormous at the supermarket. Like, rather than, it was really regrettable. I was in the way of all sorts of people who wanted to get to the till, but I was in front of them. And we don't think that way. So, you know, do we think of ourselves as a, you know, by our professional qualifications, by our role as a parent, or as a child, as a sibling, as a, you know, a follower, or as a leader, or as some particular function? You know, we like to think of ourselves in various ways. So, you know, but the more, as I said, the more that we're fixated on who we are, or that we can present that to the world, then the more we're going to create suffering. I mean, it can be quite funny. I was remembering George Sharp, who was the chairman of the English Sangha Trust, the charity that invited Lumpur Sumedho to come to England back in the 70s. He was a professional illustrator, quite an art buff, and he's been retired a long time, but every so often when there would be an exhibition in London, he would sometimes invite Lumpur Sumedho, or now that he's retired, he would invite me sometimes to an exhibition in London. So a couple of years ago there was Leonardo da Vinci exhibition at the gallery in Trafalgar Square. So we went along and went to the desk, and George said, you know, 2 tickets please, and the young woman behind the desk said, oh, I'm sorry sir, there's no tickets available until, you know, the middle of September. And then George, and he's wearing his kind of dark overcoat and his fedora, he said, do you know who I am? I'm sure he'll forgive me for saying this. And he kind of gave her this look. And she said, no sir, I don't. And he said, oh well, never mind, I thought I'd try it. It was a very sweet moment. Those of you who know George know it's a very kind of Georgian moment. So that, but some people go through life with that, don't you know who I am? and expecting the world to just go along with that. But the more that we are ready to be seen in different ways, and not sort of demand to be recognized or held in a particular fashion. It's like, if you go to the hospital, if you're patient number 5, bed 3, that's who you are. To the people on the ward, you're just that woman in bed number 3, and you can say, "Don't you know who I am?" But it might not get you very far. But also that's one of the functions of spiritual practice in a monastery is giving people a different context for themselves. So you don't have to be, the great art critic or the significant professor or the mother of 5 doctors. It doesn't count. And that particularly on a meditation retreat when everyone's keeping silence, it can be a huge relief. You don't have to carry that identity around. You don't have to be anyone. You can just be blob number 5, row 3. That woman with the green shirt. That's it. What a relief. Because it's burdensome to continually be identifying with that. So that the more flexible that we are, I would say, with the identities that we have, and the more ready we are to be seen in different ways, then the more we can just flow with the events of life, and we can offer what is useful where we can, and where we can't offer anything or we have no particular part to play, then we can just keep quiet. We can live very harmoniously, very peacefully. Yes, there's a hand back there. If you can wait for the microphone. Yes, the woman beside the camera. Yeah.
Thank you for the interesting talk. Plenty of food for thought, as usual. My question is, unlike the Tathagata, we are not liberated from mental formations and consciousness and so on, and hence governed by the law of karma. So if we are nothing, who or what then receives the results of karma? Is it the I-ness you mentioned in the analogy of the fragrance of the rose?
Well, the thing is that there's apparently a being who is the recipient of karma. So that the laws of cause and effect function inexorably. And the more that the mind is identified with a particular set of memories, feelings, a particular set of characteristics, then the more it will feel like I am this person here is the owner of this karma. But in a way, it'll be more accurate to say that the results of karma are experienced here, but to not turn that into a separate individual entity. So insofar as that sense of awareness is attached to and turned into a me or a mine, then there is apparently a being that is the owner of that karma. I would say that essentially that there is no being that is the owner of the karma. That's just the appearance of things. Just like, you have a name, I would presume. You have your own story, your own identity. But then when that's deconstructed, you can't find what that really is. Whether your name is Susan or Sarojini or whatever it might be, that you say, okay, well, what's that word referring to? Is it this body? Well, this body keeps changing all the time. It's breathing in, breathing out. And is this the same person that was there 30 years ago? Will it be the same person in 30 years' time? It's in a constant state of change. So that when we say that the person who is the owner of the karma, it's a convenient fiction. So because that quality of awareness, whether it's there's the feeling that it's identified with this body, this mind, it is not in its actuality identified with it. It just feels like it. Like there's something I can feel like I'm Ajahn Amaro, but that's just a feeling. There isn't really any Ajahn Amaro here. that's substantial. When you deconstruct it, there's no essential, independent, permanent entity there. It's like with the Buddha saying that about himself. You know, the Tathagata is sitting in front of you, yet you can't define the Tathagata in terms of the being the body, having the body, not having the body, being the personality, not having the personality, and so on. Yet the Tathagata is right there. So it's frustrating to the thinking mind. But this is where the usefulness of insight meditation, and also particularly this kind of reflective inquiry. So when you remember something that you've done that was an achievement that makes you happy, and then you can look at that and say, I'm proud of that. But then you take that apart and say, okay, there's a feeling, there's a memory that arises. You know, I came top of my class. I've got 3 fantastically loving children. I'm very proud of that. I'm very happy about that. So there's a memory, there's a set of perceptions, there's a narrative, there's an emotion. But if each one of those is looked at and then explored, well, what is it that knows that narrative? What is it that knows that perception? What is it that knows that emotion? Do they have an owner, really? And again, you're not trying to create a different belief system, you're just exploring what's already here. You're not trying to get something that you haven't got. It's like exploring what has always been the case, but we didn't realize it because we're so identified with our body, our mind, our thoughts, our feelings, our personality, our personal story. And that's one of the kind of shocking and frightening, but also liberating qualities of insight. It's like, oh my goodness, all these things that I'm proud of, they don't really belong to anybody. Oh. I enjoy being flattered and being praised, but what is it that's being praised? Oh, well, what's being praised isn't who I really am. Oh. And then there's this real, well, it's just like praising gravity. You know, how wonderful gravity is. Well, doesn't really apply. Like, you're a wonderful person. Well, yeah, you're welcome to think that, but what's here is not really a person. Yeah, so say grateful for, I'm really grateful for gravity. Doesn't mean it doesn't have any meaning. I don't know if this is making sense, but it's like in terms of practicing Dhamma, you're not trying to get something that you haven't got already. It's more like discovering what's always been the case. So it's not like you had an ego and you're going to lose it and not be anybody. It's like the ego is already not what we are. Like an analogy they give in this respect is, if you're walking through the grass, it doesn't really work very well in England because we haven't got that many poisonous snakes. Imagine we had a few poisonous snakes. So you're walking through the grass. It works very well in Asia, so Thailand. You're walking through the forest or walking through the grass, and you see this round shape in the grass, and you feel afraid and tense. And then you realize, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a coil of rope. And so then the question is, what happened to the snake when the coil of rope was recognized? Nothing happened to the snake because there never was one. It's like, what happens to the ego when selflessness is realized? Nothing happens to the ego. That never really was that never really was substantial or solid or real. So nothing is being lost apart from the illusion. So the laws of cause and effect function. So if a harmful action is carried out, there'll be the painful result of that, and that will be experienced. But when you look at it, well, what's the agent, what's the owner here of that? You say that the memory of that unskillful action happens here. But when you look for the me, the I that is the doer or the owner, there's just the awareness of the memory, the awareness of the feeling, the awareness of the regret that arises and passes away. So it's both a recognition and an acknowledgement, both of wholesome and unwholesome and neutral action. So that yet karma has its results. Something you feel very proud of and glad about, there's a warm feeling. Something you feel very bad and embarrassed about, it's a bitter, painful feeling. But painful feelings arise and pass away. Delightful feelings arise and pass away. They're not who and what we are. And again, I'm not putting this across as a belief system, but this is where insight meditation in particular helps to reveal that and brings the mind to that, oh my goodness, there never really was anything there. Wow. So this is called, and that practice, that kind of practice, the development of wisdom, is called the karma that leads to the end of karma, which is an expression that the Buddha used. So it's an action that you take, but it leads to the end of action, the end of karma and vipaka. So that the laws of cause and effect still function, gravity still pulls things together. But the sense of ownership, the sense of I and me and mine around that is dissolved. Does that make sense? It's good it's very useful to take these kind of themes and explore them, because we can hear these words and everything's recorded now, like filmed and audio and everything, so you can play it back and explore it. But it's most helpful within the meditation to really bring that in, so that the mind be quiet and as still as possible, and then to explore that. Say, well, Ajahn Amaro said there's the laws of cause and effect, but no person who's the owner of those effects. How could that be? Well, there's the memory of that action, and then the sweet feeling that comes from that. But that which knows the sweet feeling is not a feeling. It's not sweet. It's just knowing. It's aware. How does that work? Is that true? Is that real? Is he right? Is he wrong? Is he talking nonsense? What's the truth? And so we explore it for ourselves. And often with these kind of areas, it's just like for a second or half a second, the mind goes, oh. And then quickly, then the self-protection programs come flowing in. Like, I think I need a cup of tea. What's on the TV? Oh, that's that new reality show on tonight. Better watch that. Things will come in to distract our attention. But for that half a second, something like that gap after the question, who am I? What am I? Oh. So the self-protection programs are very comprehensive. And we often sabotage our own spiritual efforts. Not deliberately, but very effectively. That when those kind of insights dawn, something in us feels very threatened. But I want to be proud of my children. They are great people. I'm really proud of them, and we don't want to lose that as an identity. But it's if we can see that kind of sabotaging going on, where we say, no, but I want to be a famous teacher. I want to be loved. I want to be this. Then there's that. If even that feeling is looked at, so here's the I want to be something feeling. Here it is. Okay, fine. Carry on. Try and own it. Good luck. I used to live in California for quite some time, and they have, particularly in the San Francisco Bay Area, they have very philosophical bumper stickers. They're very fond of sending messages to each other on the backs of their cars. And one of the popular ones back in the 90s was, I've given up my search for truth and I'm now looking for a good fantasy. That's a popular bumper sticker. I've given up my search for truth and I'm now looking for a good fantasy. So it's kind of a joke and it's kind of not a joke. Because that very saying, I don't think I want this, I don't think I'm ready for this, I don't think I want this to be true. So in terms of, say, karma and its results, karma and vipaka, then taking that reflection and just there's that kind of a statement saying, well, the laws of cause and effect function inexorably, and that's the lawfulness of the Dhamma, Dhamma niyamata. They function completely according to the laws of nature. But the effects of action, what is it that owns that? Does it have an owner? How is anything really owned? Like, can you own a sound? Can you own a colour? Can you own a thought or a cloud? And he said, well, I can't own a cloud. Obviously, it's ridiculous. So how can you own a memory? No. And in that half a second, before, so of course I don't know, I did it, I remember doing that, so of course it's my memory, I remember. In that half a second before that jumps in, there's something that recognised you can no more own a memory than you can own a cloud. I would suggest. Something is that the chitta, the heart, which is aware, that our own natural wisdom, it knows that. Before our habitual patterns of thinking come wading in. So I would invite you to explore that. Yes, if you can wait for that microphone. If you can wait for the microphone, then everyone can hear the question.
We're just talking about string ringing. What's that mean? And Arahant, what that mean? Could you explain it?
Well, in the Buddha's description of enlightenment, he defined 4 particular levels. So the first level is called stream entry. And so stream entry, like the stream, like a little river, Sotapanna. And so stream entry, the stream that is being entered is the stream of the Eightfold Path, as he described it. So the stream entry is the first level. And so once stream entry, that level of insight has been reached, then that person, that being, the level of insight is such that they can no longer be reborn in any of the lower realms, and that they will have no more than 7 lifetimes before they reach enlightenment. So that's like the point of no return. So once stream entry has been realized, total enlightenment is guaranteed within a few more lifetimes. The next level, and so the 3 characteristics that need to be seen and let go of for stream entry to be realized are self-view, this identification with the body and the personality, and then there is doubt about what is the path and what is not the path, vicikicca. And then the third one is silapata paramasa, which means attachment to rules and conventions and social forms, rites and rituals, so that believing that, say for example, that if you have to recite, unless you recite the Buddha's name, you'll never be liberated. Or if you bathe in the Ganges river, then all of your bad karma will be washed away. So it's like believing that in the action in itself, making those sounds or taking those actions, that's intrinsically purifying or liberating. Or something that has value, like saying a £10 note. They're saying that a £10 note is worth £10. And so to see through Silapata Paramasa is to recognize, well no, a £10 note is just a human agreement. It doesn't have any value in and of itself, apart from being a piece of plastic or paper. It's just, and even on the note it says, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £10. So it's an agreement. So we agree to say reciting the Buddha's name is a valuable thing, or that we agree to say bathing in the Ganges will wash away your bad karma. It doesn't make it true. It's just something that people have agreed to give value to. And so that, like stocks and shares are very, the price of stocks and shares, people say, oh, it's valuable, everyone buys it, and its price goes up. Oh no, it's a disaster, it's completely valueless, and the price goes down. So Silapata Paramasa is the value, believing in the value of something, and saying it has value, it has meaning in and of itself. So to see through those, the attachment to your body, your personality, to social conventions, and also to have no doubt about what is the path, that is what constitutes stream entry. So the next level is called once returning, so that means when someone has reached that level of once returner, then that means they'll have no more than one life as a human being. They return to the human world no more than one time, and then enlightenment will be guaranteed. Or they might be born in the higher realms than the human realm. Then so that is with the once returner. the qualities of ill will, negativity, is reduced, and the quality of raga, of lust and desire, is reduced. They're not eradicated, but they're reduced. The next level is called anagami, which means non-returner. So when the mind has reached the level of, and also when I use it, when I use the term like a person has reached or a being has reached that level, it's more accurate to say when the mind has reached that level, rather than the person, in the light of the conversation we just had about karma. So when the mind has reached the level of a non-returner, then it's such a level of non-attachment and clarity that once this human life is over, then there will be that mind will only be born in these higher Brahma realms called the Suddhavasa. So in Pure Land Buddhism is based on the Suddhavasa. Suddhavasa means the pure abodes, or the pure realms. So that's where anagamis, or non-returners, so they at the end of this human life, they are born into one of those 5 of the pure abodes, and then they realize enlightenment in one of those realms, either immediately or after some time. And then an arahant, someone who's reached that full enlightenment, then the mind is not reborn again. So you can't really say a being is an arahant. You could say the mind has realized arahata, or has realized the quality of arahatship. But you can't really say, I would say, you can't accurately say a person is an arahant. Rather, that mind has reached arahatship, or has realized arahata. And that is where the mind is completely free from all greed, hatred, and delusion, all identification, all conceit. And so that if a being who's been living a human life realizes arahatship, then that mind is not born into any realm. And then I think last Sunday talk, or the one before, I was talking about this, that people often ask the Buddha, like Vajragota, asking what happens to an enlightened being after the death of the body? And the Buddha said it's not describable. And they thought, do they reappear in a different realm? Do they go to some sort of super heaven? And the Buddha said, reappears does not apply. Well, do they not reappear? Does not reappear doesn't apply. Or do they both reappear and not reappear? If you can follow that. He said, no, that doesn't apply. Well, do they neither reappear nor not reappear? He said, that doesn't apply either. So the kind of head clutching begins. And so then there's a dialogue that I was quoting the other day with the Buddha with this young Brahmin called Upasiva. And Upasiva asks the Buddha, so one who has reached the end, do they no longer exist, or are they made immortal, perfectly free? And then the Buddha says, one who has reached the end has no criterion by which they can be measured. That which could be spoken of is no more. You cannot say they do not exist, but when all modes of being, all phenomena are removed, all means of speaking have gone too. So there's nothing you can say. Words don't apply, because our words and our concepts, they all come from seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, from three-dimensional space, from time. If you try to conceive a reality that is not connected with time, not connected with space, not connected with individuality, there's nothing to hang it on. So that's why the Buddha said the Tathagata is profound, immeasurable, unfathomable, like the ocean. So you can't, like the Buddha in that dialogue with Upasiva, he says, you cannot say they do not exist, but when all modes of being, all phenomena are removed, all means of speaking have gone too. So the German philosopher Wittgenstein said a similar thing, that that which cannot be spoken of, the mind must necessarily pass over. That's the way he finished his famous logical treatise. If you can't speak about it, then the mind has to pass over it. It doesn't mean to say it's not significant or meaningful. It means you can't talk about it. It's inconceivable. So there's no way of addressing it. So to our thinking mind, that's very frustrating. Where do they go? But I feel it's helpful because it's pointing to the fact that, oh yeah, this mind creates a world based on time, on space, me here, you there, time passing. It's now 4 o'clock, nearly 4:01. Sunday afternoon, you're wearing a pink jacket. I'm a monk. It's Sunday. These kind of you there, me here, time, form, sound, colour. That's the world we know. If you take away time, you take away location, you take away individuality, the words and concepts have got nothing to form around. So the Buddha was quite clear in saying you can't talk about it. The words and concepts don't apply. So rather than trying to fabricate a way of describing the indescribable, he just said, don't bother. Just realize this is the most important thing the most important possibility, potentiality of this life. And once it's realized, it'll speak for itself. Like I was saying about the Buddha doesn't say what the real self is, or using that kind of language. So just stop identifying with what you're not, and what is real will speak for itself. That makes sense? So the stream entry is the first level of enlightenment, and then Arahata is the final level, and that's the format that the Buddha used in his teaching, and so that it's describing levels of realization of the mind, and the degrees of clarity, the degrees of freedom, the degrees of say, happiness, if you like. If you switch the microphone on.
Mantra, for example, isn't just your mantra. Sometimes does have weird thing happen. Then what's that?
Well, it's just
It's really not like a normal kind of do thing. And then sometimes they go to a wild, weird stage of mind. And what's that?
Well, the mind is a wonderful and terrible thing. So depending on what you do with your mind, all sorts of things can happen. There are different kinds of meditation practice. If you concentrate your mind in certain ways, then it can make you fall asleep. You concentrate your mind in other ways, and it can make the mind fully awake. Some minds will produce particular images, other minds will produce no images. Life is full of all sorts of different perceptions, but what we make out of those perceptions is up to us. If you showed an iPad to somebody 100 years ago, they can be convinced that you had incredible magical powers. Or going into a shop, giving a piece of plastic to a person behind the desk, and then you can drive out in a Rolls Royce. Wow, that's magic! And he gave you the plastic back. You didn't lose anything, and he just gives you a Rolls Royce to drive away in. Wow, that's magic! Amazing! What did you do to his mind? So it's like whenever people would come to Ajahn Chah and they'd talk about meditation experiences, either things that were kind of very exotic and interesting, like they'd see an image of the Buddha or some great, Ajahn Mun would come and teach them, or they'd go back to listening to the Buddha in the Jetavana, or they'd have horrible experiences, they'd be kind of attacked by ghosts and demons, or they kind of have the body flying up into the air and exploding. He'd say, well, that which was aware of the body exploding, were you paying attention to that? That which knows the body exploding and that which knows the body just walking on the meditation path is the same awareness. The mind that knows the image of a Buddha, or the mind that knows the sound of your own breath, is the same mind. You don't have to make anything of it. So he was always kind of trying to help people not focus on exotic experiences or strange experiences, but rather, what does your mind do with it? Or he might say, well, my mind is confused and busy, and I'm just kind of wrestling with pain in my legs, and I'm really just frustrated. And he said, well, are you aware of that frustration? Are you aware of the busyness of your thoughts? Yeah. Well, so just observe that the pain is changing. It's anicca, dukkha, anatta. That's all you need to know. Just let go of it. Or if someone says, I had this vision of the Buddha and he came along and he said, Sunyo, I've got teachings for you, and here, you're a special disciple, and listen to this and you'll be totally liberated. And said, well, was it changing? Yeah. Does it have an owner? That, who was that Buddha speaking to? Was that a person? Was that a real you? Or what is it that was aware of that? Was it anicca, dukkha, anatta? So he would always be bringing it back to your own moment-by-moment experience, rather than saying, oh wow, that's a great experience, that's really important, oh that's terrible, oh dear. Yeah, you want to worry about that. Say this mantra and you'll be protected. He would never do that. He would always just bring it back to, well, what's your mind doing with it? Whether it's a pleasant experience, a painful experience, whether it's really exotic and colourful, or whether it's something very mundane, like pain in your knees. Jack Cornfield, who's a famous meditation teacher in the States now, is a good friend of ours. He was a monk with Ajahn Chah back in the 1960s. And so he trained with Ajahn Chah for a few months and then went off to study with different ajahns in Thailand and Burma, and he came, after a couple of years, he came back to Luang Por Chah, and he had all these stories, like, I went to Mogok Sayadaw and Mahasi Sayadaw, and I went to Ajahn Buddhadasa, and I went to Luang Por Tien, and he's describing all these interesting meditation experiences, various visions and powerful states of concentration. And Luang Por Chah just listened to him and said, when Jack got to the end of his story, he said, so, can you let go of it? Completely unimpressed. But Jack tells the story, it's Jack who tells the story. Like, Ajahn Chah was completely unimpressed by all these exotic experiences, these strange feelings and visions and powerful states of concentration, samadhi in different depths. And so, can you let go of it? Yeah. Is it anicca, dukkha, anatta? Which might seem a bit deflating, but that's the point. Because the mind loves to grab particular perceptions. Oh, I recited the Buddha's name and I had this incredible experience. My mind went into this deep state and I saw the Pure Land. And, well, but that's, you could also say, well, I recited the Buddha's name and I started to think about my trip to Aldi, going through my shopping list, Well, my mouth was reciting the Buddha's name, and he said, well, thinking of your shopping list and going to visit Aldi or seeing the Pure Land, essentially it's just sanya, it's just perceptions. You can make it into a thing, well, I just had a vision of the Pure Land, wow, I'm a special practitioner. It's really wonderful, amazing thing. Your mind grabs it and identifies with it. Or but if we have wisdom, okay, well that was a vision of the Pure Land, so anicca, dukkha, anatta, it's not self. It's just perceptions arise and pass away. That's it. Or that, my mind spent the whole time, my mouth was reciting the Buddha's name, and I was thinking about my shopping list. And but I can now recognize, well, even that was anicca, dukkha, anatta, it was arising, passing away, it's not self. That's all it was. So that every experience can be the fuel for wisdom and for liberation if we let it. If we are not wise, then we think we are attached to something being a good state or a bad state, or valuable or not valuable, and we create an identity around that. I'm someone who's failing in my practice. I'm someone who's succeeding in my practice. I'm a good meditator, I'm a bad meditator, and those become our identities. But on the theme of today, I'd say none of those are really who and what we are. None of those are the real me. The mind likes to identify with success, with failure, with different qualities. But as long as the mind identifies with anything, it's necessarily out of tune with Dhamma. Like the Buddha said, yena hi manyanti, patatang hoti anyatati. Whatever you conceive it to be, the truth is other than that. So whether we conceive ourselves as a success or as a failure, things going well, things going badly, any conception has to be wide of the mark. But the refuge is the mind that's, here's the mind conceiving me as a success, here's the mind conceiving me as a failure, or me as completely average. That's what the mind is creating, this person. Aha. And then in that moment, that awareness is the refuge. And that's how I would say that's the real path of liberation. So I see that the clock has gone on to 10 minutes past 4. So I think that's enough for today. I wish you all well. So somebody else will be doing the next couple of Sunday talks. So I have my solo retreat time scheduled. So I look forward to seeing you again, or variations of you, in a few weeks' time.